Welcome back to this week's episode of Be Bolder. Once again, I am joined by another Lindsay, a much more fabulous Lindsay than Lindsay Amico. And if you missed it, she was on with us last season also. But we wanted to bring her back again this season because her nuggets of wisdom were so extreme that I didn't feel like we could fit them into one 40-minute podcast. So she's back here to join us. And so, Lindsay, for those who were remiss in listening to the episode last, why don't you tell us about you and then we'll get into it?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you for having me again. So I founded a business, Picture Perfect Mind. It was actually about 4 years ago, but I went into it full time about 3.5 years ago. I am a mindset coach and I go into organizations and help folks with stress reduction, mindfulness, productivity, overall health and well-being, because as we all know, in our society, it's so fast-paced. We're filled with these stories and these shoulds and how things should go and what I should do and what college should I go to and all of these things that it's really kind of redefining how to live an authentic life. So I help folks to sort through a lot of that and really get into what's right for them. I also, of course, work with folks one-on-one. And then I have a side component to the business as well that is a bit more spiritual, a bit more focused on the body and energy and card pulls and all of that fun stuff. So it's this spectrum of professional into more of the woo.
I love
So
it.
kind of dabble in it all.
Okay, I love it. And side note, I feel like I have to say, like, you are just glowing in this thing, and I'm like the dark spirit coming to join us. Outfit. Okay, so you're glowing and I am
Oh
the
my gosh, stop.
no, I love it. It's like you're just like lifting off the page. So if you can't see this because you're listening to this podcast, log into the YouTube link and take a look because she looks fab. So okay, let's get into this because this season we're really talking about 4 pillars that we think about and how those impact our abilities to run our day-to-day lives and our businesses as best as we can. And those things are physical health, financial health, mental health, and spiritual health, whatever that means to someone. And so some of the things I want to talk about were exactly what your business arms do. You know, when you're talking to, let's start with an organization, and you're noticing that maybe the overall mental health of the organization may feel off. What questions do you ask those people, and what is some of the first advice that you tell them after you figure out that they are in fact off?
Yeah, I mean, and this is such a complex question as well, which is why I'm also learning a bit more about organizational development and things, because right now I really have designed the business to be not a one size fits all, but more of like, I'll go into the organization and ask, what do you want? Do you want a one-time lunch and learn? Do you want coaching sessions with that? Do we want a series? But to some degree, I can only have so much of an impact because as we know, there's all these different layers. There's leadership, there's HR, there's various processes, there's reacting to our external world. So there's a lot going on. But when I really zero it down and I want to create a presentation and address some of the pain points that people are going through, a lot of it boils down to, okay, how are we feeling on a day-to-day basis? And how do we want to feel? And there's a gap between those two things. So let's break down some of the internal things, some of the thoughts that are invoking the feelings. Let's talk about your external environment and kind of do a bit of an audit. What's going on in my life? What do I love? What would I love to change? What do I love about my job? What do I love about home life? And all of this, because if we don't do an audit from a place of compassion and love, which really needs to be emphasized, because let's face it, sometimes when we do an audit and we go through things, we're like, oh, I haven't really been doing that very well, right? So it's more about let's just take an assessment, see how things are going and how we would like them to go. Because without that awareness, nothing can change because we're just surviving and we're in the day to day. So the first step is really to slow down for a second and try to start to pinpoint some of the things that might be affecting this. And it's certainly not about trying to find all the solutions. It's just more about like, okay, where am I right now?
So I love that. And so once you figure out kind of where people are and you figure out, okay, we've got some things that we've got to solve for, and every situation is going to be different, right? Like, not this isn't a cookie cutter approach, but when you tell them, hey, first of all, maybe they're forward thinking enough to say, oh, we've got to hire someone to take a look at this. But do you have to then have a conversation with them as to why the overall mental health of an organization, for example, is acutely important? And what do you tell them?
I think the really good news is that this is becoming so much more knowledgeable and prominent in the HR field. Like, in my experience, a lot of the leaders that are willing to bring me on are already knowledgeable about these things because they recognize that there's been high turnover rates or their staff just have been struggling. The pandemic emphasized all of this. So the good news is I have that advantage because let's face it, to start a conversation with someone that's not really open to any of this, they might not even be bringing me on in the first place because they don't necessarily have the self-awareness to say this also, of course, is on the individual's responsibility. We all have individual responsibility for our lives, but also how can we make our environment better for people? Are we having compassion and empathy for where people are at and helping to meet them at least part of the way so that they can work the best for themselves and the organization?
Mm.
Because, I'm not as well versed in HR as other professionals, but you know, it's like we can't necessarily work on an individual basis unless we have a smaller organization. But what are some of the broader themes that we're seeing that maybe we can start to address at the core instead of, oh, well, let's just do a stress reduction webinar and hope that they get something out of it and then just hope magically that everything's going to be better. We know that some of the people that are on that webinar are going to be greatly impacted because they're willing to take some of the 5-minute steps that I share. But
Mm.
also there's a lot of people that are really frustrated on that webinar. There's a lot of people that are shut down in a lot of ways because they've been struggling for so long that they're like, well, I don't want to even try deep breathing. I don't want to try meditation. Because I've been struggling for so long. So
Mm.
it's this kind of really complex issue that requires a lot of open-mindedness and I think self-awareness from leadership to say, we're willing to change some things to help our employees out. What are those specific things?
I love that. And so let's shift it a little bit then to the individual side of it, because, like you said, it's kind of on the individuals a lot of times to actually make the changes. So
Mhm.
let's talk for a second about the mind body connection. And
Ah,
so, what the mind thinks the body feels and hears, right? So, when you're talking to people, and you're talking about their overall mental health and how it connects to their physical health, what do you tell them? How do you think about that with them?
well, I think the first thing to really notice, which I go to this immediately because I've always been someone that lives in my head. I don't know about you,
Same.
but super anxious my whole life. Um, didn't really understand that I wasn't my thoughts, kind of always was more geared towards rumination, overthinking, having lower self-esteem, comparison, and also in school and stuff, that's so common. Like we're all growing up, we're all going through things. But
Well, and some organizations even feed it to you, right? Like, I mean, I went to law school. They feed it to you. They compare you with every single other person and tell you that you are, in fact, a failure if you're not X, Y, or Z. I see it all the time.
It's like this box, right? And I think all of us like growing up to kind of figure out, okay, how can I fit into a certain box so that I'm going to be okay?
Yeah.
So some people it's being popular, or, a lot of us try to find our group. Some of us, like for me, it was getting really good grades and forming more of the friendships with like the higher performers, because that was a way, I wasn't really athletic. So I could shift here and find success here. So I think it's recognizing we tend to live up here, and many of us have had trauma in our lives. All of us have had some form of
Mhm.
trauma, the smallest to the biggest. So it's like we're up here processing instead of dropping into our body, and then we're not realizing that so much unfortunately has settled. Have you ever read The Body Keeps the Score?
Well, yes, I have. And I don't think people should read that book unless they are ready to read that book.
Because it opens up, I mean, a can of worms. I'll even give you an example. I started going to acupuncture recently, which is, I've gone to holistic practitioners and things like that, but I have been so emotional. And I didn't even recognize, I'm like, where is this coming from? And I finally was like, oh my gosh, I don't even need to necessarily understand where it's coming from. It's just coming up out of my body.
Mhm.
It was somewhere.
Yes, I can remember one time, but not to digress here too far, but I went to acupuncture, and my dear friend, like, he was going through acupuncture school. So he'd be like, "Can you come in once a month and we'll practice on you?" And there's a doctor that was like, cool, cool, whatever. So they did it. And it was right after I had a very like catastrophic level loss in my life. And I was about 5 months post that. And I thought I was dealing with it, like holding my life together just fine. And they put a bunch of, needles and whatever in different stress points and places that would like help release the heart chakra a little bit. And
Mm.
I had these little things in my body. They leave the room, and you're just there chilling with your thoughts, and you can't move because you're covered in needles. And I just start sobbing. I mean, uncontrollably sobbing to the point where eventually, like the guy came back in and he was like blotting my face. He's like, "Oh, honey."
I'm so sorry.
So, but it was wild, and that's
Yes.
we hold on to, and we don't even know that we're holding on to it, right? So that's the point, right? It's mind blowing.
Because I think I'm always trying to understand things, right? So if I go into acupuncture and I get emotional, my first thought is, oh, okay, this is releasing something. What is that about? And like, I want to identify it and I want to understand it because that's my go to. But sometimes we just have to realize that it's just energy. And it could have been anything from something that happened when we were 5, or someone beeped at us when we were driving the other day. And you just never know. So I want to really emphasize that, like, as you're embarking on this journey of figuring out your mental health, figuring out what support you need and all of that, like, you don't need to figure it all out right away. And like, let's meet ourselves where we are today.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. So we're kind of talking now, we're moving a little bit into a trifecta or a triangle, if you will. Like the physical is connected to the mental is connected to the spiritual is connected to the physical. So, what you're hearing here is we take things in mentally, we process them somehow or don't physically, and then that ultimately impacts us spiritually or otherwise, right? So, as we're thinking about this, can you talk to the level of impact that not being on, a good pathway, if you will, spiritually and or mentally can have on your overall performance in work, life, etc.? Talk to us more about that and why it's so important.
Yeah, I think that is such a good question, because I think we become, at least this is my personal go-to oftentimes, and I find it with a lot of people I work with. We go to, I'm doing something wrong. There's something wrong with me that I can't show up, that I can't get out of bed, that I'm having headaches, that I'm having insomnia, that I'm having hormonal issues. There's something broken within me, because look at this other person. They're getting up at 5 a.m. and they're doing all these things. It goes back to comparison. And so the mind just forms this conclusion of like, oh, well, they can do it. I should be doing it. And if I can't do it, I'm broken. But I think the bottom line is that we haven't been listening to ourselves. We haven't been allowing ourselves to listen to our intuition, to connect to our body in whatever way that means for us. It doesn't even need to be working out. It can be absolutely anything from just sitting and processing emotions to journaling to going to a therapist to getting a massage, but we've been so on autopilot and just pushing and trying to meet the expectations of everyone else that we start to struggle and we start to be so hard on ourselves because it feels like I'm doing all the things. Like I'm showing up for my work, I'm showing up for my family, I'm trying to eat healthy, and it just feels just so devastating to say, why am I not performing well? So what we really want to get down to is, what is my body trying to tell me? Or if we even want to shift into the spiritual component, and this is different for everyone. So this can be defined as intuition. This can be defined as source or universe. This can be defined as connection to the earth. This can be defined as angels or God or religion. But this is all about how you feel like you kind of just relate to life.
Mhm.
And I think that it's about asking just kind of like, what might be missing here? Or I'm so deeply entrenched in the mental. Am I really shifting into a different perspective of the spiritual, right? How can I open up into exploring that a little bit? Have I ever explored that? Is there some trauma around that? And maybe that's not where we want to focus now, but it's just really, I think, coming down to what's in alignment for me. And it's about self-discovery and getting to know ourselves. And it's not about being perfect. It's not about resolving everything. It's just kind of this like really interesting introspective journey of, okay, if I'm not performing well, there's probably a lot of little things that have led up to me feeling that way.
Yeah, and then how can I unpack some of those time by time? It's like an onion, you're sort of peeling them back, and eventually you get much better at it. So let's talk about more about spirituality and how that can kind of impact us day to day. I know I'm a person who, for the longest time, I would see people crying, and I would start crying, and I thought, oh man, I called myself just hypersensitive or
Mm.
hyper empathetic, and then I came to realize, like, oh shoot, I'm like actually internalizing sometimes other people's junk. And so
Absolutely.
let's talk about that a little bit. If you have an environment that's a little challenging and someone's sort of
Mhm.
internalizing, maybe we'll call it the toxicity around them, how do you work with them or talk to them about how do you, I mean, because sometimes it's not as easy as like, I'm going to quit today, like go
Oh
find
my
something.
gosh, absolutely. And yeah, even if you feel in your heart or your gut that I need to quit, I definitely recommend you not taking any rash actions like that, and like sitting and talking with someone and developing a little bit of a plan, because that is going to highlight a ton of internalized anxiety if you're just thrown out there. Um, so coming back to your question around spirituality on a regular basis, but also what if we are taking in energy all the time? And what do we do? So one of the things I like to do is say to myself, I am I and you are you,
Mm,
because I'm the same way. So whether this is trauma related or also a gift, I think for me, it's a combo of both. I am very, very good at seeing everyone else's emotions, at reading people, at feeling their feelings. I don't really watch sad movies.
same. I watch Pixar films that I've seen hundreds of times, so I know what's happening. And that's
And
it.
even
Or Disney.
those, like at the beginning of Finding Nemo, why is the mom dying?
Or like Bambi, that's on the do not watch list. Lion King on the do not watch list. I can't do this.
Or we fast forward those parts, which
100%.
is, that's like a whole other it's like not maybe healthy, but I'm just like, hey, I have to be aware, okay, this is going to invoke sadness for me, and I don't want to feel that emotion. maybe another time you're like, you know what? I think I need to be sad today and I need to just
Mhm.
experience something and I need to feel safe in that. But I'm always just like, I am I and you are you, and kind of grounding yourself. My friend mentioned to me the other day, she's like, I just kind of envision myself as a tree.
Mm,
And I was like, that's so interesting. And she's like, yeah, I just envision myself as being grounded and rooted into the floor, and nobody can move me, and I am just kind of here. And that to me was a really beautiful visualization, because once we start to identify some of our trauma responses or some of our triggers and reactions, it's very difficult because we're just in this thick of emotion,
right.
especially if it's a coworker or it's a boss or it's someone we interact with on a daily basis. That is incredibly draining. So another tip I also like to share is, if someone's just kind of rude and you know that it's them and not you, insert a laugh track.
Oh,
If someone says something to you or someone else and they're just being absolutely ridiculous, insert a laugh track in the background and just pretend you're watching a sitcom, because the more we can understand that it's not us, we didn't do anything wrong, that might calm that energy a little bit. And
sure.
I also want to emphasize, it's a practice.
Yeah.
Nobody learns this overnight. We're human. Nobody's ever going to not have any triggers, any emotional reactions. Emotion is normal, but you're right. Like at work, who wants to feel that way regularly? And that's when we might have to create that external shift.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like it's mine is mine, it's yours is yours. I say, is it mine? Like if I start to feel something and I'm just like, why am I so anxious? Why am I so stressed? Why am I
Mm,
sad, mad, whatever? And there's no logical reason for it. The first thing I have to say is like, is it mine? And I
mm,
came to realize, when you've got hyper emoters, is what I would call them, people you can feel their emotions through the wall next door. You've got to figure out ways to kind of manage through that. I like the tree analogy. I am more of a bubble person.
bubble of light.
I'm like, this is mine, and I'm just keeping it here, and you can keep your stuff over there.
Yeah.
So interesting. So let's talk about, energy vampires, as I like to call them, or energy black holes. So, you might have people in your work environment or otherwise that are just takers of your positivity, light, energy, however you want to call it. How do you think about interacting with those people, and why is it so important to interact with them in a specific way?
It's such a great question. And I feel like I'm always evolving in my answer with this, because I'm always trying to figure this out for myself as well. I think the first step is, we always want to make an external shift. So let's say we get into a new role and we're like, oh, this coworker, I can't stand them. It's been months and I'm having this issue. Our first thought is, I got to change my job. I got to get out of here. I got to make a change, because we're trying to help ourselves. We're trying to find the solution. So I would encourage you to take a deep breath and be like, there's this person or people at work that I am just not jiving with. And one of the things, this is takes a lot of self-awareness, but one of the things we can start to ask ourselves is, how much of this is a mirror of me? So in this mirror theory, it is, what is this person igniting in me? What is similar to me? What is the total opposite of me? Um, what are they showing me about myself? So maybe they're a yeller, which is not appropriate, of course, but maybe they're just like a loud person. And that is activating our inner child, our that part of ourselves that remembers when someone else used to yell at us. And so it's this, okay, this is what I don't like. This is why. And gaining that knowledge. And then, of course, like you said, okay, how can I get as grounded as possible? How can I start to create some boundaries? So, can I start to put headphones in? Can I perhaps change my work environment? Can I have a discussion with a supervisor if it gets to that level? Um, is it important to have that discussion, or is this just a bit more of an annoyance for me and it's more of a lesson than I really need to stand up for myself and do something? And I think being able to talk with someone through that's really important, because we're just in our own minds and our own feelings, and it's just hard to figure out what's the right solution there, right?
Right. Right. Oh, geez. Yeah. Okay. So I know there's no hard and fast line to when someone maybe needs to make a change, but do you have any as close to black line
Mm,
rules as you can find when you're like, hey, you need to change this?
mm. Well, I think, like I said, it takes awareness first. It takes like a bit of an audit, but we know nobody's going to change until they decide they want to change. Um, you can be really inspired by a talk or by a coach or by a speaker or even this podcast, and you can feel really good and get that energy and be so excited. But if you just kind of keep defaulting back to your neural pathways of how you've always felt and how you've always thought, and you don't have that decision moment of, I can't do this anymore. Like I'll give you an example. I think we've all had these epiphany moments, but I went through a breakup. Um, and it was the last breakup before I met my husband. But in that experience, I remember having this moment of clarity. Like it was almost like it must have been my intuition or a guide stepping forth. And it was, I'm not doing this anymore. The next person I'm going to meet is my husband. I'm not being with anyone that does not want to be with me. And it was this like resounding decision. And I think I'm getting chills as I'm saying it. It's just so powerful. And that doesn't mean you know every step of the way. And that doesn't mean you don't need help. And that doesn't mean there won't be challenges. But deciding this will not be happening moving forward and I'm going to figure it out is huge.
Hmm. Yeah. And I always hope that people don't get to a place where it's so bad that, their physical health is on the line or, anything like that before they hit
And
that
sometimes you
turning
need to
point.
get there because we're so reactive, right?
I know, but I often say, right, honor yourself and the universe will reward you. And so if you're getting to a place
Mhm.
where, it doesn't spiritually feel right, it doesn't mentally feel right, like physically you have a pit in your stomach or you're having like, some sort of weird ailment or constant pain, like you really need to evaluate that and be honest with yourself because nothing changes if nothing changes. And, I having been through like severe health issues, right? Like I could only wish I would have taken steps faster, sooner, differently. And that wasn't my path. Like it is what it is. But, honor yourself and the universe will reward you. And I cannot tell you how honest of a statement that is. And so every
Mhm.
time someone's like up at a crossroads in their life, it's like, that's what I tell people all the time. Honor yourself. What's the path that honors you? And I don't mean like, what's making me, happy today? Do I get more money? Maybe that's a thing that
Right.
drives, but I mean like your spiritual, your soul. Like what makes you that happy, so overjoyed, purely, fundamentally happy, and do that thing.
And and giving yourself permission, because we've been taught you can't do that. That's not going to work. Who are you to do that?
Mm,
Right? That's not going to pay any money. Oh, you failed at that before. And you know what's so funny is oftentimes this is just our inner critic. It's not even necessarily someone standing in front of us. Sometimes there's a manifestation of
sure.
a physical person in front of us, but it's all our own stuff a lot of the time. And it's giving yourself permission to honor yourself, like you said, and figuring out what's a small step that I can take today to honor myself.
100%. 100%. And if we all did that more frequently, I bet you spiritually we'd be more aligned mentally,
The
physically, and
whole
probably
world.
financially too. Like people make a lot of choices because they're trying to bury some of the pain points of things that they have going on, right? So
Absolutely.
always super, super interesting. So, and obviously, thank you for sharing that story. I had a similar story to that actually. After a breakup with someone, I finally just said I was going to be the crazy dog lady. I was like, forget it. I'm not doing this anymore. But to your point, like that's what I said.
I'm not doing this anymore.
I was done, you
Yep.
know? But I do think it's interesting to, stay along that path. And let's talk about how the universe listens for a second, right? The words that we say, the universe reacts to, the things that we think the universe reacts to. And when I say universe, so that we're all clear, right? Like that could mean God, that could mean whatever being you look to, but like I call it universe, right? So, but I do think universe reacts to the things that we think and say. So let's talk about the power of speaking to ourselves the way that we deserve to be spoken to.
Oh my gosh. So I have a really good song recommendation, and it's by Andy Grammer, and I think it's called Say It to Myself. And it makes me cry every time I listen to it, but it's all about, why can't I tell myself I love myself? Why do I have to hear it from everyone else? And especially if you just kind of look in the mirror, and this can get kind of intense, and it's okay if you cry, or it's okay if you feel super uncomfortable, but just listen to that song as you're like looking in the mirror. And first of all, it's just an amazing song. But second of all, the second you start to give that love to yourself that you've been looking everywhere else for, it's this moment of, even if it lasts a millisecond, oh my gosh, everything's okay. Like, everything's okay. I don't need to accomplish things so that I'm worthy. I don't need to act from a place of anxiety. Like, I can just simply have love within myself, because the universe lives within myself.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to remind people. So I similarly have a song. It's called Who I Am by Wind Sparks. And I think for a long time, I put a lot of pressure on my past self. And I looked at my current self based upon that past self. And I didn't love my older self enough. But like, I hear that song, right? And it brings me to tears, because I'm like, never again will I not fully respect myself. Will I not, honor myself, love myself. And I think it's really hard for people to get there, though. Like, you have to really, there's a lot of work that goes into like truly loving yourself, and being able and willing to make the tough decisions. Because I mean, you're talking about that inner critic. Sometimes it's the external critic too, right? They're like, who do you think you are? What are you doing?
Being too big for me. This is uncomfortable for me.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, I don't know. Like, or, it's too much. You're too this, you're too that. And it's like, look, if this is too bright, put some sunglasses on and head in the other direction. Like, I don't have time for this.
Yes. And how long were we trying to fit into that mold?
Oh,
So long.
so
Oh
long.
my gosh. And even still now, it just kind of comes as a default sometimes, right? That is so good though. It's about them. It is not about you. It's about, not everyone's going to like you. And that is so hard for me as a people pleaser. And that's like that, once again, that trauma response that I've kind of identified. Unfortunately, not everyone is going to like you. People might listen to this podcast and be like, she's not my cup of tea. And I have to be okay with that, because I am loving myself and I am okay with myself.
Yeah. Whether or not someone else loves you does not dictate whether you are loved, right? Like, because if you are loved, it doesn't actually matter what all of those other people say. And then if you are truly loving yourself, the decisions you're able to make for you and your relationships, your personal health, your work life, exponentially different and better for you.
I'd love to ask you, what is, I feel like you've been on this whole health journey. What is like one thing, one tangible task that you started to do for yourself physically that started to shift things for you? What did you start to do that was honoring you?
Sure. So I used to pride myself in being able to work till like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, starting at like 8 or 9 in the morning, right? And yes, you take a break to eat some food or whatever, but like you just keep going and going. And I mean, I will tell you, I'm a sled dog. Sled dogs like to work. And, I would work through blood pressure spikes. I would work through tears streaming down my face trying to get something done. I would work through literally people screaming into the phone because they wanted something. I'd work through passive aggressive emails, and you're still like just beating yourself up. But one of the things that I realized I was having a physiological response to was my blood pressure would spike so high that my cheeks would get flushed, my neck would get red. And it was like, the more that happened, the angrier I got and the less clear that I could think. And so now, if that happens, I said, like, I have to honor myself and take care of myself because I don't get better if I keep repeating, past patterns. If I so much as get I mean, even just like a
Yeah.
hiccup, and it could be 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And
Yep.
my employer doesn't love to hear this, but like it would be 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I will shut my computer and I will walk away until I am not at well past that, because there's a difference between feeling like, okay, it's down, versus like it's down enough that I can re-engage. And so I have to stay super committed to that. But I found that when I do that, my work product is better. My thoughts are more clear. I'm less angry. I can go on and on and on. But to put it in perspective, I had borderline high blood pressure and heart related issues at the age of 36 and 37 years old. Okay. Now my blood pressure numbers are like when I tell you picture perfect, like what a marathon runner has. I went into the doctors the other day, and I'm like, and I always ask, what's my blood pressure, and they're like, 110/65. And I started cheering. Okay. I was like, that's amazing. And they're like, what is happening? You're just here at the lady doctor.
You're just so happy, and they're like, this is
This feels
fine.
like a lot for someone to be happy about. And then I explained to them why it's so important to me, because times past, it was 147/100. It was 147/110, to the point where one time a physician asked, she looked up and she goes, what are you on right now? And if that doesn't tell you there was a problem, right? And so now I just honor myself by saying, you know what? It's too much. I can't do it. I can't do everything. That's okay. Because I can't do anything if I'm not here to continue to do it. Right. So that's what I do. How about you?
Good for you. Oh my gosh, that was just such an amazing example. I do a couple of different things. Lately, I've been really focusing on hydration, walks, yoga. Yoga is my jam. Even just 10 minutes of yoga a day
Yes.
helps my back so much. And it doesn't have to be a workout. And just like you said, though, just having the awareness to recognize my emotional reactions, because unfortunately sometimes you have a deadline that you have to meet, and you're just okay, well, I really have to get this in by 5:30 today. But also putting things into perspective to be okay, where am I working from? Am I working from anxiety? This is going to be late. This person's going to be mad at me. Can I potentially ask for an extension? Can I have some compassion for myself? Can I, like you said, just go sit for 5 minutes, take some deep breaths? I think it's just anything that we can start to try. And even if you have to try a couple things, it's
right.
Sometimes one tool isn't going to work on another day.
Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't work all the time. What I said usually works, right? But sometimes I have to take it a step further. Sometimes I have to go for a walk. Sometimes I have to go outside. Sometimes I have to just get in my car and drive somewhere, because that's,
And just scream.
Yeah. I
Scream.
have a screaming pillow that I just scream into once a day, like they do on Always Sunny. No, I'm kidding. But I mean,
I'm like, that's great if you
do your thing, right? No, but it's real. I mean, you've gotta do the thing that works for you, and you've got to be honest about it, and you've got to be okay with it. And quite frankly, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this, but we're in 2022. Unless you are working on death row trying to get someone off, and you're waiting for that last call 16 minutes before, the moment, right? Nothing is life or death. Sure, there's deadlines, and we've got to work hard, and we've got to do our best to meet the things that we commit to.
Right.
But is anyone dying or whatever?
I'm not a heart surgeon.
No, this isn't brain surgery. I'm not saving a baby. I am me personally, right, I write paperwork, and it's important to help my clients meet their deadlines, but or whatever, or make investments or whatever we're doing. But at the end of the day, if something slides by 2 hours, it's okay.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we have to recognize too, that sometimes it feels more comfortable to feel anxious and to feel work, because we've been doing that for so long. But the concept of stopping or resting or pausing invokes almost like even more anxiety. So it's being kind to yourself to say, you know what, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been acting like these people are dying and I need to do this right away for a long time. And that's okay. And let's breathe into that and let's feel into what might be the next best step to adjust that and feel a little better and recognize it's not life or death.
Right. It is not. And so if you really need to like break it down, remember that like
Yeah.
no one's dying here.
Yep.
Like you
Yep.
just gotta put it off to the side, take a deep breath, take a step away, do whatever it is that you need to do, and then come back to it. Or if it's completely antithetical to who you are as a human being, like then you got to figure that out too. But at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to. It's
You
it's
got
it's
that
about
right.
we can't do great things if we're not here to do them. So like, don't put yourself under a stressor that'll kill you.
Yeah.
Because chances are, if you're working for someone else, they'll replace you anyway. Like it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter, right? So
Yep.
keep that in mind too.
Yep.
So,
100%.
all right. What are your remaining words of wisdom? If you could leave people with some nuggets here today, what do you want them to take away? What's moving you spiritually to tell them?
Mm. I posted this quote on LinkedIn. It might have been yesterday, but it's along of the lines of, if you allow someone else to dictate what is in alignment for you or what is of value to you, you'll just be playing along with someone else's puppet strings the rest of your life. And so I would just say, even if it's for 5 minutes, take some time to really feel into if you feel in alignment with your life. And maybe it's just one particular area of your life, and it's just health, or it's just relationships, or it's just work, or whatever. And just ask yourself, is this in true alignment with my gut, with my soul, with my intuition? And if it's not, like I said, have compassion and just celebrate the fact that you came to that conclusion. And then know that there are people, there are amazing coaches, there are amazing therapists, there are amazing mentors, friends, community in this world. And if you don't have someone you think of right away, get a hold of me, who will help guide you in that process of coming back to alignment with yourself.
I love it.
That's what I have to say.
I love it. So with that, Lindsay, I thank you for joining us today. This is so great to have you back on this episode. I think this was really important for people to hear, because if this stuff is out of line, the whole shebang is out of line and it's just going to get worse. So fix it now, right? So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And for all you out there, as always, thanks for listening, and don't just be bold, be bolder.